Good evening, and thank you for being here to this installment of Texas Monthly Talks. We're very pleased to have with us this evening the men's athletics director for the University of Texas, Steve Patterson. My name is Brian Sweeney. I'm the editor of Texas Monthly, and I'd like to thank you all for being here for this event. I'd also like to thank the sponsors who helped make this possible, both of whom have set up outside. We have MyPlates.com as well as Cordova on Canyon Lake. And a big thank you, of course, to the AT&T Executive Education and Conference Center for giving us this venue, this beautiful place to have the event, so thank you to them. You may recognize the man sitting to my left, if not for all of the other times that you've seen him on the news, for this cover story that my colleague Sam Glenn had written for us as we were talking about essentially the rebirth of UT athletics. That's probably a little bit of an overstatement, but of course when you talk about a new coach, new changes in leadership, and perhaps a new direction, we thought it was an opportunity for us to talk about the school and the direction that it was heading into, and the notion of profiling somebody like Steve Patterson, who is a Longhorn through and through. Yes, he had been away from the state for a while, but of course he has both his undergraduate and his law degrees at the University of Texas. He assures me that he's going to spend a lot of time talking about those undergraduate days on the drag. But certainly the notion of sports was born into his blood. He comes from a deep line with his family of being in the sports business. As you know, he was in the front office and working in as a general manager for various teams, including the Houston Rockets, the Portland Trail Blazers for professional basketball, worked in the front office for the Houston Texans in professional football, and was even with the Houston Aeros for professional hockey. But here we're tonight to talk about the University of Texas and its athletics program, and so welcome Steve Patterson, please.
Thank you.
So the first thing I would say is I just look back over the last couple of days, you have had in action men's diving, cross country, women's soccer, football. The women's volleyball team has a home game on Wednesday. I'm sure that I'm missing something. I know that UT is one of the few programs that has a men's athletics director, women's athletics director, Chris Plonsky, who is here tonight. But I would want to get a sense of how are you keeping up with all of those sports happening at the same time, and which ones do you actually have an opportunity to go to? How many events are you seeing in person versus sort of hearing about after the fact?
Yeah, it depends upon the week. You know, if I'm traveling a lot, this past week I was traveling a lot, so I didn't get to as many as I would normally if I was here. You know, was in Kansas for the football game, but you know, I'll try to, if it's in the spring, say it's baseball, softball, tennis or track going on, you know, I want to get to at least one of those during a homestand. A lot of nights, softball's faster than baseball, so a lot of times you can go to 3 innings of baseball, go catch the softball game and get back, and maybe check out the track and field, or tennis and maybe going on at the same time. But I try to get around to all of them. It's just a matter of trying to be in whether you're in town or have a donor event or have something else going on.
What is after all of your time in the sports business, again, as I had said, associated with basketball, with football, with hockey, you were the athletics director at Arizona State previous to coming here. What is your favorite sport to watch?
You know, what I like are the stories that come out of it.
Okay.
You know, it's hard to pick one. I grew up playing basketball. Also grew up in Wisconsin with Vince Lombardi's Packers. I can remember the baseball team leaving and coming back. But, you know, you get to a place like this last year, right after I got here, the women's volleyball team was on a roll, and you get a chance to go to Greg Gym, and a lot of energy in the place, and a lot of fun and excitement. And that's what makes it great. Or, you know, you host the NCAA championships, and you got our swim teams up after 2 nights, and you're thinking, geez, you might be the national champs. You know, you can have a lot of fun with that story. And unfortunately, Cal came back with their seniors and won it the last night. But I think the chase and the stories that come out of that chase are what's really the most fun for me.
If you're coming up on a year in the job, having replaced the legendary DeLoss Dodds, whom I want to talk about in some detail as we get a little bit later into the conversation, in large part just because of his philosophy and what he set in motion here at the University of Texas. But you're coming up on a year. If you go to your biography on the UT website, at the very bottom, one of the things you are apparently being measured by are conference championships, because they have listed the conference championships that have been won in your tenure. You're now at 3. I wonder if you could talk about the difference between how you see this school where you are at now, and what was it like when you were here as an undergraduate and a law student, and what was your relationship to the athletics programs then? Were you, taking your shirt off and painting your chest and doing that to support the teams, or what were your experiences like?
You wouldn't want me to paint my chest, but it was a lot of fun. Earl Campbell was running amok, and we were dancing on the drag, and after every game, and you could sit in the stands and bet on how many plays it would take Earl to score, and if anybody ever said more than 7, it was, there was something wrong with it. It was 3, 2. Unfortunately, we got knocked off by Notre Dame, but it was a great part of the college experience. Our basketball teams were fun to watch, whether it was at Greg Gym or then moving over to the Irwin Center. It was great to get to know a number of those athletes, see where they went on to after their careers here as collegians. I think it's an important part of what happens in American college life, and I enjoyed a lot of it while I was here.
How do you think the sport has changed from back then watching it as a fan to where then you getting involved in it as a professional?
I don't know that it's changed as much. It's funny, we were at AD's meetings last week and listening to people read some of the headlines of the complaints they may have had about college athletics 100 years ago. The headlines are exactly the same. I think the big change probably has been on the women's side, where there's far more opportunities and they're far more competitive and having a lot more fun and a lot more media attention around that. I think the other thing is you've got much more television, more cable access, more exposure for all the teams, and so that brings positives and negatives.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I had already mentioned Chris as the women's athletics director. I'm a little curious as to just the intersection of your duties with her duties. It's not as cut and dry as you're in charge of everything related to the men's athletics and that she's in charge of everything related to the women's athletics. On the other hand, I do think it's worth going back. You think of the enormous contributions that, say, Coach Conrad had made to women's sports after Title IX. But Texas was also involved in some litigation in the early 90s, which was settled, and one way to sort of bring balance to the sports programs was the creation of women's teams for soccer, for softball, for rowing, I believe, to equalize it. So tell me a little bit about that. One, how your job interacts with Chris's, and the state of female athletes at the University of Texas.
Well, I think certainly it's one of the items that drove the commercialization of what we've done and was part of the great creativity that DeLoss and Chris have driven here over the last quarter century or so. In terms of how we intersect, I think we're one of the last schools, maybe the last school that still has a men's and women's AD. Chris has been a great teammate since I've been here, and I think our strengths complement each other. She does a good job of trying to keep me from going off the rails at certain times. I think that as you look at how we break out what we're doing is we've tried to be a bit more efficient over the last 8, 9, 10 months. And so Randa Ryan did a great job running academics for us for a long time here. She was originally on the women's side when men's basketball and baseball weren't performing so well. She took those over, and last year's APR for men's basketball is 1,000, and baseball does the best of almost everybody that's in the World Series every year. We made the decision to move football over there, so now she's totally in charge of all the academics for men's and women's. We had a loss and somebody died on the training side, and so we sort of consolidated that on that side, sort of on the men's side more, with that leading the charge. So, we've looked at places where we could be efficient with Butch leaving early. We've got some of the men's teams being overseen by Kathy Arson. Most of the rest of the men's teams, Arthur's looking after on our side. So, what we've tried to do is sort of play to some of the strengths that people have. A lot of student services really reports to Chris directly, so that we can have sort of the right size and number of reports. And also that if people have to spend more time on certain items where they've got a history or they've got a strength, let them play to that, and the same on my side.
But essentially those responsibilities have now become blended in a way, maybe playing to various people's strengths, things they're particularly good at.
Less of a separation. I think it's just kind of an acknowledgement of where we are 41 years past Title IX. You know, everybody's got opportunities. Let's play to their strengths. Let's make sure they've got an opportunity to advance their careers and do what they can do best for the organization that they're in.
Do you think, are we at a moment with the University of Texas that we have parity between men's and women's sports in terms of what is being offered and the resources that are made available to the different student athletes?
Yeah, I think we do.
I have an 11-year-old daughter who is wanting a scholarship to play soccer at the University of Texas, so I have a bit of a vested interest in that. Let me go back to your coming in as athletics director, as men's athletics director. It was a difficult time for UT. What had been at one point a program that had just been rolling, particularly through the late 90s and the 2000s, had stumbled a little bit, particularly on the football side. I look back to when your predecessor came into Lost Odds in 1981, and he was asking, you know, what do I have that I'm walking into here and taking this job? And one of the replies that came from one of the members of the UT administration was, well, everything is fine except for football and for basketball. You're going to have to fire both of the coaches. One of the great decisions that Coach Dodds had made, that Dodds had made, was in the hiring of Coach Brown. Mm-hmm. And at that point, when Coach Brown was hired, the revenue for the athletics department was $21.4 million. We're now at a point where the revenue is at $165 million for the program. When you came into it, obviously you came in with eyes wide open, but what were your expectations of landing here and knowing that difficult decisions were going to have to be made, at least as they related to the football program?
You know, people ask me if that was a tough time or the decision's hard to do. You know, I just look at them as doing your job. And
but dealing with the football coach is not just doing your job, is it? I mean, isn't that the brightest of spotlights that come through from a position like yours?
I just look at it as doing your job.
Okay.
And, you know, Mac had a tremendous run here, 16 years. Not many folks last that long in one place. You know, obviously changed the face of UT football.
Right.
Obviously changed the revenue model here. I think we all owe him a great debt of gratitude. That's part of the reason that so many people were so loyal to him for so long. I think in conversations we all realized, and he thought, you know, it's probably time to make a change, and so we did. And you know, we involved a number of folks that are involved with the university on a committee. We talked to a great number of the T Association members, former football players, got their feedback on what we thought we needed in a new football coach. Created our list of criteria and went out there and did the search and you know, found somebody who met it. And Charlie's been great so far.
I don't expect that any decision like that is going to be a unanimous decision. And I know that you're talking about building the program. But of course, you end up walking into a minefield, it seems to me, that whenever you pick a coach, you're not going to make everybody happy. Tell me a little bit about your relationship as that came through with that process and you going with your gut, as you tell Sam in this story. Did it make things more difficult with you for some of the boosters here that have been here a long time? Some of whom I know that you've known, but obviously have a lot of sway and a lot of power, and names adorn the campus and various buildings.
You know, I think the reality is people all want to see what's best for the university as a whole. And like any large organization, you could be General Motors, you could be a government agency, you could be a university. You've got a large number of constituents, all having their own points of view. I think the key is to take in those points of view, and ultimately the people that are in positions of management have to take all that input and make the best decision they could possibly make. I think it's the press's job at times to try to sort of foment the conflict or controversy that may be perceived there.
Right.
So that and actually, in many respects, it's not anywhere near as large as it winds up being assumed to be.
Okay.
And I would expect that people that invest their time and energy and money and political backing and other resources into any kind of enterprise, you ought to talk to them and get their input. And so that might be a coach, it might be a student athlete, that might be a donor, that might be a professor on campus, that could be a whole host of different people. You want to get their perspective and see where it is and then make the best decision you can make.
But I think it is fair to say that we look at the tremendous growth that UT Athletics has had particularly since the late 90s.
Sure.
The hiring of Mac Brown and the gasoline that puts into the engine, not just with salaries and just support, but with buildings, facilities, and
Sure.
things like that. There had to be a moment where you had to think that this hiring is going to be one of the things that either makes or breaks me here at UT. Did you believe that or not?
I didn't look at it that way. I'm not unmindful of the fact that if the football team doesn't play well, at or above expectations, you're not going to be able to successfully drive the business.
Yeah.
And I think everybody in the department understands that. But I don't look at it, I don't go into the day being afraid that, oh God, this is going to blow up and it's going to be the end of the world. I go in trying to gather as much information as I possibly can, look at the criteria that you're looking at, see who fits that set of criteria for a particular position, and then you build consensus around, is that the right person to take that job? Yes or no?
Obviously, Charlie Weiss was not happy to see you guys over the weekend, so congratulations on that win, and not only getting the win in a shutout. Have you talked to Coach Strong since then? Do you guys?
Yeah, I talked to him this morning.
Okay. How do you, when you see that, what does that do in terms of, I'm not going to say changing the mood, but getting a win in the conference, on the road? Does that help reorient things, even though you know you have tough games coming? You've got Baylor, you've got Oklahoma.
That's an expected win.
Right.
You know, you got to get that one given where
Right.
Kansas is playing. I think Charlie clearly understands the challenge before him. I think he's had a lot of work to do when he got here. I think he's executed on it. I think he's inculcated his culture into the team. He's given people an opportunity to buy in and participate. If they just can't get there, they probably got to go find their happiness someplace else.
Okay.
And but I think he's been very fair and very clear, and he lays out his expectations. And if you have folks that aren't going to buy in, like any company, like any organization, like any agency, if they're not going to get there, you can't keep them.
So what you're referring to there is that since the time that he has taken over, 9 players have been dismissed from the team for various reasons.
Yeah.
How does that process work? Does he make a phone call letting you know that something is happening? Like, I'm just curious internally how those decisions are made.
Well, certainly you got the coach and his staff were involved. Arthur Johnson works with us and oversees the day-to-day of football, is involved. I'm involved. Those decisions don't happen willy-nilly. You want to look at what are the criteria for what are your expectations for how somebody comports themselves. You know, what are they doing academically? What are they doing off the field? What are they doing vis-a-vis law enforcement or other sorts of things that they shouldn't be involved in? And at a certain point in time, particularly if it's somebody that's had sort of repeated issues, and usually if you have an issue in one area, you're probably having it in another area. They're not unlike any other people in any other organization that you just get to the point of going, like, you had 3 strikes, or you've done something that's just too far out of bounds. You know, it's really best for you to wind up someplace else, I think. And
Does that number surprise you, though? To have that many players dismissed?
No. I mean, I don't think that's a particularly large number given the variety of different issues that you can have with 18 to 22-year-old college students, you know, and I don't think that it particularly reflects badly on the football team or college students as a whole. It is what it is, and so, you know, if somebody's not going to comport themselves properly off the field, or if they're not going to go to class and do what they're supposed to do academically, or, you know, or they're not going to follow the rest of the rules, at a certain point in time, if you're saying, if you don't do this, you're going to get punished,
Right.
you know, you got to do it.
Coach Strong, a lot has been made of his 5 core values, the 5 rules. We wrote about them. I know that everybody here is aware of them. But one of the things that I might ask, and it dovetails, I think, with the problem right now that professional football is having, but I think it's also, as Coach Strong has said, it's part of the problem that perhaps colleges are having in terms of the players that they are developing and then sending them off into a situation where there's a lot of money, a lot of exposure, and a lot of, you know, advantages that come with that lifestyle. Of those, you know, it's no guns, no drugs, treat women with respect, that sort of thing. Do you feel that that is something that actually needs to be said in the year 2014? I mean, on one hand, I find it very refreshing that it is spelled out. On the other hand, it worries me a little bit that at a major university that has to be said in the first place. And does that apply to all of the programs now, all of the teams within, that you would say that these 5 rules should be applied across the board to basketball and baseball and tennis and right down the line?
I think they are, and they should be generally applied. You know, I would say as a parent, you know, I know what a tough job it is. Thankfully, I've got a great partner who's shouldered the majority of that responsibility for the last 20 plus years. I am often struck, and it didn't matter whether it's on this campus or ASU or other campuses I've been on, at the sort of lack of skill set that you would expect certain kids would have. And that, you know, it comes from a whole host of reasons. You know, you could just, I mean, let's say you wanted to pick just the academic part of it. You know, you look at where our high school graduates rank worldwide in terms of math, English, other skills. I mean, it's pretty pathetic. We're not anywhere near the top quarter.
You mean top to bottom, right?
Top to bottom. I mean, you know, where do U.S. high school graduates rank in math?
Right.
You know, I don't know, or something like 25th or 50th in the world or something, right? So they come to a college campus. How are they going to perform? You know, because largely they haven't had an environment that's taught them it. So I don't think that set of skills is any different than a lot of the other life skills or how to talk to somebody or how to work with somebody skills. And so, yeah, sometimes you do have to have sort of surprisingly simple rules to get somebody up to where they should be.
It is true, though, of course, that there is a lot of recognition for that. Think of the meeting that Coach Strong had with the NFL commissioner over the weekend. And so the visibility for the University of Texas through something like that, I think, is incredible. Do you have any insights into that conversation, or the NFL contacting Coach Strong and wanting to get insights into running a program and dealing with players?
Yeah, well, I think it was interesting. And I mean, I have some, that was Charlie's discussion with Roger, and you know, they're both friends of mine, and I, you know, shouldn't talk specifically about that. That's their private conversation. I would say, though, that in general, by way of example, when I was at the NBA and we were drafting kids who had only been in college for a year or were coming out of high school, what the NBA found was you had to put systems in place that are second nature on the college campus. In terms of tutoring and mentoring and academic support and teaching kids life skills that you didn't have to teach so much to people that were playing 4 years and coming out, that had matured some, and you did have to do it for kids that were just coming out after a year or out of high school. And so as an administrator, the commissioner isn't dealing day to day with the athletes. He's got to deal with the owners and the press and the banks and the sponsors and everybody else. And so I think that the pros can look to college to create models for a much more complicated kind of a relationship, which we have in college, that you don't or haven't historically had in the pros. In the pros, it's an employee-employer relationship generally, and it's part of the distinction between the pros and what college athletics is all about. And so, I don't think it odd for somebody in Roger's position or somebody he may delegate it to or somebody at a professional team to help look for some feedback.
Right. Do you? Is that always going to be part of the culture? I mean, we say in our story, for example, at the time that you were with the Portland Trail Blazers, that you had to make the decision to end the relationship with some of your players because of troubles that they've been in. In the local press, for example, the team had been referred to as the Portland Jail Blazers because there have been so many problems. Is that always going to be an issue, or is there a culture of complicity that is in some way allowed these things to go on, in part because the dollars are big, the ratings are big, people love the sport, and they don't want to take a chance on getting the talent off the field or off the court?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that doesn't exist, but I think that perspective is overstated.
Okay.
I think if you look at that age group, its demographic makeup, you're going to find that in general, their comportment and behavior is better for professional athletes than it is for a similar demographic nationwide.
Okay.
But when something happens with somebody who's as high profile as a Ray Rice, it's a story. You know, when it happens in a neighborhood in any American city with somebody who's not a celebrity,
Right.
it's not a story.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, because the reality is it's the same if it's battering your wife issue there or in either household. I do think, though, that the professional athletes have a responsibility to comport themselves in a better fashion than your average citizen. And similarly, at the University of Texas, it's a privilege to play sports here. It's not a right. And so if you're not comfortable with a higher standard, don't come here. Go someplace else. And Charlie's been very clear of that. I think our other coaches are very clear of that, and that should be the standard that we set.
Is there any advice that you would give Commissioner Goodell if he had called you? What would you say to him as it relates to issues with domestic violence and how the league has been handling it?
Well, I'm not gonna tell Roger how to do his job. Roger and I have been friends for 25 years. I do think, though, that this is an issue that has come to a head, and it does seem that he's reaching out and trying to get people that are more expert in the field. It's something that wasn't as much of a priority 6-8 months ago as it is today, and so you got to pay attention to it, put some resources against it, and see to it that you have fewer issues with that in the future. The reality is though, all these people are human beings, and human beings are going to fail. I mean, none of us are perfect, and that's not to make light of any of these situations or minimize them, but you're never going to have perfect performance by all 32 teams, all 100 plus players who sort of cycle through in a year. It's just not mathematically impossible.
The commissioner has admitted to his own failures in this process and dealing with the Ravens and dealing with the evidence and decision making. Do you think he still has the credibility to lead the NFL through this?
Well, I mean, assuming nothing comes out of the Mueller investigation that would compromise that. Look, Roger's been a great leader of the league for a long time, tremendous success, viewership, revenues, very involved in the expansion. I mean, Roger and I talked every day for probably 2-3 years going through the Texans deal. Very able, very competent administrator. It'd be tragic, really, if this was sort of something that brought his career down.
We've talked about the five, the 5 pillars, the 5 core rules that Coach Strong has. Again, I think the timing for that, coming in as a fresh face to the program, instilling a level of discipline overtly, obviously has been a good thing, I think, for the university, given the headlines. Is this an opportunity for other colleges to change? Is it an opportunity for UT to do even more reflection to make sure that, faced with a similar situation or something happens, that the school is able to move on it decisively and quickly?
Well, I think most schools do operate that way. When you have institutions that fail at it, it becomes a story, and it rightfully should. But I think most administrators, most coaches on most teams, day in and day out, are trying to do the right thing, are trying to have positive outcomes for their student athletes. The reality is we've got 500 student athletes that we look after every day. We've got about 125, 135 that are playing on a football team. And so if there's one person that goes wrong, or 9 people that go wrong for whatever, it's a limited number of folks out there. They will get the most media attention. You won't get as much attention for the 99.5% of the kids that are doing the right thing day in and day out, but for their college athletic scholarship would not have a chance to go to a university, particularly someplace as great as UT. Right. And so I think we need to do a better job of telling that story every day to counterbalance the sort of more salacious stories that can happen from those people who screw up.
I want to begin to move on to just the operating of the program and where you want to see it, but I want to stay with that for 1 minute, because I do think the issues that are related to what is happening in professional sports right now are connected to what happens at the collegiate level, because you're talking about that group of players moving through, learning a culture, being somewhat insulated, I think, from the rest of the world, and sometimes having decisions or actions taken care of, right? Perhaps at times they're not held to the standards that other people would be. That's one side of the issue that's been happening. The other side of the issue is something that has been brewing now for several years, but really has also sort of come to a moment, and that is the safety of the players. We've talked a lot about concussions, head trauma, and things along those lines. We know that football is an incredibly violent sport, and in fact, part of its appeal is the physicality of it. But what do you think should be done now, or what is UT doing to try to ensure that its players are as safe as they can be? What is happening different now, do you think, that it was not happening 5 years ago or 10 years ago as you're bringing players up?
Yeah, I think there's a misperception that the colleges in general don't look after their student athletes. I also would say that we get more concussions on the women's soccer team every year than we get on the football team.
Right.
So
again, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and we are saying no heading at this point, right? Yeah. There are girls on the team who are already wearing those, sort of padded headbands, so that if they are doing that to protect, and that's exactly right. I mean, when I look at the numbers of young women who are having concussions as it relates to soccer, it's shocking, and quite frankly, it's scary.
Yep. And so, I'm not trying to make light of that at all, but, we have been proponents at UT, and it was the case when I was at ASU, of using the best practices from the Princeton studies in terms of how often you should have contact, how many days, how you remove somebody when they show signs of a concussion. And our doctors make the decisions as to whether kids go back on the field or not the coaches. So we've been very clear about that. That's been the policy for some time. I don't think universities as a whole have done a good job of communicating that. Mm-hmm. So there is this misperception that you just keep sending folks out there when they're banged up to play. Am I going to say that every school does as good a job of that as we do? No, I'm not going to warrant that. I think there are schools that could do a better job, but at least in the Big 12 and in the Pac-12, we're very clear about what the expectations are for when what appear to be concussed student athletes go back on the field and when they play again.
When you look back, though, at this season, my alma mater came to open up the season against UT here in Austin. Lost, which is something I'm used to. But that was the last game that David Ash will ever play as a quarterback. Do you have any doubt in your mind that the signs weren't already there that David Ash should not have played in that game? I mean, does it surprise you that because of that one game against the University of North Texas to start the season that he's out?
No. I mean, I look at it and say, you ask what the doctors say, and they know better than I do. You ask what the kid wants to do. You ask the kid's family what they want to do. He wanted to play. They were okay. If he wants to play, to play. You talk to the doctors, and they say, yeah, he looks like he's okay. If he gets hit again, it's not going to be too good. Right. He probably shouldn't play after that. And he was okay at the end of the game. Late that evening, he said, hey, I'm having symptoms. I want to get checked. We brought him in the next day, had him checked. He wasn't coming back. That's it. You just make the decision. You have to do what's best for the student athlete.
Right, absolutely. Let's move forward as we come up on our time. I should have said that we'll certainly save time for questions here so that I'm not the one just peppering you the entire time. But I want to go a little bit longer because I do want to talk about sort of the business aspect of the job and how you see the direction that you want to lead the school. I had mentioned earlier when Coach Brown was hired in 1997, the budget for the program was $21.4 million. Right now we're at about $165 million. And the story had said it won't be long before it's $200 million a year. So I want to ask you about the revenue, which it seems to me that your job is in large part designed to kind of keep this going through good times and bad, which UT has handled remarkably well over the last couple of years. DeLoss had always said that, you know, at the University of Texas, we don't keep up with the Joneses. We are the Joneses. What is your plan for making sure that that's the case? Again, you have this enormous overhead.
Yeah.
My understanding is that your debt for this year alone is $242 million. So what is the plan through good times and bad times to keep UT moving forward?
Well, I think, quite frankly, college athletics as a whole are woefully underleveraged. You know, when I was in the pros, we would have killed to have the multi-generational emotional attachment
connection,
that people have across a number of sports, across a number of years, across all the venues. So I think there is tremendous upside in what we do in arena. We partner with the Aspire Group. We've got 24 people, is it? That have joined our staff. Last year we probably had about $7 million worth of unsold ticket inventory. We need to sell that. We will continue to look at expanding our facilities. There's still tremendous interest in our premium seating, clubs and suites and loge seating, and so we'll expand that, we'll expand revenue there. I think there's tremendous upside on the sponsorship side. You know, just had a meeting with IMG, WME today, and they're in agreement, and if we properly leverage that on a relationship basis, not a transactional basis, I think we've got a lot of growth there. I think what we do with our licensing and merchandise, we've got tremendous growth there. I think we need to do a better job of shifting what we do with the Longhorn Foundation away from sort of transactional ticket operational relationships towards endowing our sports, endowing our coaching positions, looking at how we make those teams individually self-sustaining forever, because there's going to be increased pressure on the football team and men's basketball team, and then once that happens, what happens with the rest of the teams for name, image, and likeness and full cost of attendance. And so,
explain the endowment. So you say you turn to tennis. I love to play tennis, right?
Sure.
I'm sorry that my courts are gone.
Me too.
I know that they'll be coming back. But how would that work? How?
So you know, you've got the model of Texas, which is build a tremendous number of premium seats, sell them on the back of the football and men's basketball team and the baseball team to a certain extent, and use the additional revenues that you generate there to build facilities and support the other teams. So that's sort of at this extreme. And then you have some folks that are a little bit to this way. And then over here, you've got Stanford. And Stanford's endowment is $500 million. So, you know, you go to Stanford's football stadium and you look around and go, well, they got empty red seats and they got no signs.
No signs, right.
And they got no suites. And then they say, you talk to me, you say, well, why not? And they go, we don't like signs. You know, and we don't, you know, suites are not egalitarian here in Northern California. and you know, yeah, the kids didn't show up for the sit in the upper deck, so be it. Well, you know, at UT we like signs. We sell a boatload of suites. And, you know, when I was at ASU, if it was screwed down, we put a sign on it, you know, to generate revenue. So I think there's different models out there, but for us, we've tried to break each one of the teams apart separately and say, what is the program that's going to allow you to be self-sustaining individually, yourself, recognizing that golf's never going to sell a boatload of tickets. But this Friday, we'll have a golf tournament, and we're going to have, you know, 8 or 10 of the great golfers that have played here play in a charity golf tournament. We're going to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars that can go towards endowing the scholarships for the golfers that come to play here at the University of Texas. And essentially, you take them off the books, right? It takes about $750,000 to fully endow a position, so that the interest off that every year pays for the room, board, books, tuition of that student athlete, and then that position is endowed for forever. And so, you know, we're going to shift a bit that direction, because I mean, you can only build so many suites.
Absolutely right.
At a certain point in time, you know, I don't know where we're going to jam some more in. I mean, we're working at it, but at a certain point in time, you can only build so many more.
With your background, and again, as we had talked earlier, in professional basketball, hockey, football, is a sport when it comes to the revenue side, which is to say, are you able to approach your job as the athletics director here at UT in the same way that you did if you were selling tickets to the Rockets or selling tickets to the Trailblazers, to the Arrows, or anything like that? Is it essentially the business of sports the same?
I think the business of sport is largely the same. I think historically where college is behind where the pros were. For a long time at the major public institutions, you got a certain amount of public support and a certain amount of tuition support that allowed the athletic departments to be subsidized.
Right.
I mean, there's really only about a half a dozen athletic departments that really and truly break even or make a buck. Mm-hmm. You know, the other thousands, you know, operate in the red. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there's this misperception that there's all this money awash in college athletics. Mm-hmm. That's not the case. Mm-hmm. Everybody's struggling to just try to minimize the losses or get to break even. So, but because of professional sports not having that kind of support for years, you had to be aggressive and you had to go sell and you had to go market. And there has been a tension on college campuses for a long time about, you know, how much do you commercialize this? Right. You know, like I said, you go into Stanford, literally there are no signs in Stanford's football stadium. And they're going to keep it that way. Right. And that's philosophically how they want to view their campus. And that's great. You know, they found another model that works for them. So every other school has to make that decision. How do they make a model work for them? Some schools have a student fee. Some schools have large endowments. Some schools decide to advertise or not. Some schools limit the number of teams they have. So we are going to do more things here at UT that will look more professional in terms of having a full-blown ticket sales operation that has a relationship with our customers. Right. So that, you know, when the dog ate the tickets, they know who, you know, call Amy, she's my customer service rep, she'll take care of it. And, you know, I need another parking place, who do I talk to do that? And we'll be marketing those. We'll be looking to use our facilities for more events, mm-hmm. try to create events, to create revenue and reasons to connect with the university. We'll be doing camps, clinics, other things to help monetize the facilities that we have so that they're used more year-round and all 24 hours in the period of a day. So those are the kind of things that you're going to be looking at to try to generate the revenue to provide the student services to have the best outcomes that we can possibly have for our student athletes.
That's the upside of it. Is there a downside, though, that with every time that that the program moves farther in that direction, more commercialized, more revenue, more closer to the professional sports model, that we do begin to leave the amateurism behind? I mean, do you worry that there is a danger that with all of the money now coming in, and as big as the revenue line is, that it begins to change the fundamental dynamic of what it means to be a student athlete?
I think there have been some issues, and so I would pick one. The amount of travel for particularly the non-revenue sports. So, for instance, when I was in the Pac-12, and we did a deal for the Pac-12 network with ESPN and Fox and our partners, and what they really wanted was programming Monday through Sunday.
Right, right.
And so you went from playing, you know, your men's basketball games on Thursday, Saturday, and your women's basketball games on Friday, Sunday, and your soccer games earlier in the day on Friday. Right. You got out of the Friday, Saturday, Sunday night sort of after hours kind of model more towards one that provided the programming that the networks wanted throughout the week. Well, what that meant was you had to put a kid on the road on Monday to go play in Oregon on Tuesday, travel day on Wednesday, plays in Oregon State on Thursday, and flies back on Friday. Well, Christ, they missed a whole week of school.
Right.
You know, that's not right. And we need to address that and fix that. You know, in terms of...
But how do you address it? If part of the issue now is that the revenue from the television contracts is so lucrative, and so we have seen Longhorn Network, SEC Network, Pac-12, how do you begin to hold it off?
You're going to have to negotiate that and recognize you're not going to get as much money out of it. There's not going to be as much money there. It's too much stress on student athletes. You may wind up shortening seasons. You may wind up moving seasons, you know, to a different part of the calendar year. You may move part of the say baseball season or softball season into the summer, you know, to get it out of the school year. So we're going to have to work through that to get to where we need to get to meet all the different constituent groups needs, all of which are legitimate from their point of view.
Right, right. One of the things that we talk about in this article, I was telling you earlier when we were visiting, that there's a long section related to how do you handle, if at all, compensation for players, for student athletes. In fact, it's its own section. It was the one part of the story that Sam and I disagreed on. I thought it should have been much shorter, and he had said no, given his conversations with you, where he thought that the year in sports was heading, and he's right, with the O'Bannon verdict, with what's happening with Northwestern, and the status of that before the NLRB, that it was something that should be talked about at length. So let me put that question to you, though I know that you have been pretty clearly on the record of it. Are we at a moment where you think that we are going to begin to start paying student athletes to play, or begin to give them a bigger share of the revenue? And is that something you would support?
Well, here's where I've been. The O'Bannon case said that the NCAA could not create rules that would pay somebody for less than their full cost of attendance.
Right.
And whether I was here or at ASU, we're in full support of that. Most of the high-profile schools in the more well-resourced 5 conferences have been in favor of full cost of attendance for some time. But in the NCAA structure, where you get a bunch of smaller schools whose vote counts just as much as the other schools, we got outvoted year after year after year after year.
So because the smaller schools were perhaps under a greater revenue strain, it was harder for them to do that, right?
And they want...
I think of Marcus Camby going back all of those years when I was an undergraduate, complaining that even though he was on a full scholarship to play basketball, he didn't have enough money to buy a sandwich if he wanted one because he was underpaid by the scholarships.
Yeah. Now, I would say when you watch somebody, a student athlete at a certain university who won the NCAA men's basketball championship earlier, complain about not being able to eat while he's wearing his $400 headphones, I think I know where his lunch money went. Okay, because kids are not having food, but and we're adding $800,000 a year to our budget to provide extra meals. So sometimes it just comes down to how the kids spend their money. And I did the same thing. I had to run out of money. I had to buy another Jimmy Buffett record or something, and all of a sudden I didn't have any money left at the end of the month. But I think that the perception, because the university had done such a terrible job of telling their story for so long, is that student athletes don't get a tremendous benefit. If you're a full scholarship football player at the University of Texas, the benefits you get from room, board, books, tuition, tutoring, training, and strength and conditioning is $69,000 a year net. If you had to pay the taxes on that, that puts you in the top third of the household incomes in the United States. For men's basketball, it's $77,000 a year net. If you paid the taxes on that, it puts you in the top quartile of the household incomes in the United States. I don't think that coming to the University of Texas, being able to get a degree from the University of Texas, get paid in the top third, the top quarter of household incomes in the United States, means you're being abused. I think you're being very well taken care of. I think you're being fairly compensated. And I'll tell you what, there's a line of kids a mile long that would love to take one of those spots. The reality is if you want to be an employee in an employer-employee relationship, your argument is not with us. Your argument is not with the NCAA. Your argument is with my friend Roger Goodell or my friend Adam Silver or Bud Selig or Gary Bettman or somebody else, because that's what you want. You want to be an employee, go there. And the reality is we've got 500 student athletes every year on our campus. If you look back, we're the most successful baseball program in the NCAA. On average, we're right about just shy of one player a year that gets a cup of coffee in the major leagues, okay? We're at less than half a student athlete a year that goes into the NBA over the 69, 70 years of the history of the NBA. We're at between 3 and 4 players a year that even get to be on a preseason roster in all the years of Texas football. So you look at it and you go, okay, you got 3, 4, 5 folks that might have a chance to play in the professional ranks out of the 500 kids we got this year. And of those 3 or 4 or 5 that go there, their average career is less than 4 years. So then they got to spend a half a century of their life, hopefully, or more, after that. And what we ought to be doing is training them for that, not for the 4 years they might get there. So there's this misperception out there that all these athletes are being abused and are being shortchanged in what the benefit they're receiving in their scholarship. Look, if you want to come to the University of Texas and you want an athletic scholarship and you want to be on the rowing team or the tennis team and you're good enough, God bless you, come on out. If you don't and you want to be a professional, go talk to Gary Bettman. Go talk to Roger Goodell. That's who you ought to be talking to, not us.
Do you see, though, the way the landscape is, that this could be an inevitability? That the way that that the universities are...
The reality is that there are more agents out there than there are professional athletes in every league. And that's the problem. So what do? You know, as an agent, you go, where am I going to go fishing to find some more clients? I ain't got any more. The leagues aren't expanding. There's no new teams in the NBA or the NHL or the NFL or Major League Baseball. I got to find a client. I got to compete with all these other guys. I mean, literally, there are more agents than there are NBA players, NFL players. Where are you going to go? You go fishing in college, right? They got 500,000 kids out there that are athletes. Let's go find some clients there. And who's supporting them? My good friends, the trial lawyers. Everybody guffawed and fell down and went crazy when I said it's a conspiracy between the trial lawyers and the agents to make these cases happen 3 months ago. And then what happened? Right after the O'Bannon decision came down, the trial lawyers walked in and presented their bill for $52 million. So here you are, you're saying, well, maybe we'll give this kid $5,000 a year for his name, likeness, and image, and maybe we'll give him a couple, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 depending upon what school he's at for full cost of attendance for a kid. But the trial lawyers are getting $52 million. Who made out like a bandit?
Joe Jamail is not going to like to hear you say that.
Joe called me after the last time I said that, and we love each other. And I told him that, he told me how much he loved me too. Trial lawyers, look, I love all the trial lawyers that are on my side. My little brother's a trial lawyer, so I love trial lawyers. When on the other side, again, I don't care for them too much.
It wasn't that long ago that we had this thing called the Southwest Conference. Mm-hmm. And there was a moment when one of the schools left, Arkansas. In fact, at that point, Texas was heavily courted by the SEC and by back then, the Pac-10. Then along came the Big 12, which really changed, I think, the scope of where Texas was as a regional to a national power, and certainly television opened that up. And thus began sort of the larger scale branding from where we had been back in those days. Now we're not talking about the men's basketball team will be playing a game in China coming up. There have been talks about the Texas football team playing a game in Mexico City, in Mexico. So tell me a little bit about how does that fit into your strategy? What does that do for the University of Texas to have international, international events with the revenue sports?
Sure. Universities' athletic teams really are the front porch of the university. It's the way we tell our stories to the world. There are 4, 5, 6 potential international brands in college athletics. We're one of them. Mm-hmm. If we don't leverage it, we haven't done our jobs. Okay. So you're right, in 2015, we're going to be the first ever, along with the University of Washington school, to open the regular season in China, in Shanghai. We're going to play in the building where the Olympics played. Mm-hmm. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to expand our presence as a brand, as a business, as a university, what we do with professors, what we do with potential research partners, what we do with potential students, what we do with potential student athletes. We're going to be playing a Chinese volleyball team here next month.
That's right.
Here in Austin. We're going to do a men's basketball tournament, a round-robin tournament at Madison Square Garden and in Chicago and in Los Angeles at Staples Center in 2018, so that we have a presence in the larger media markets. It's incumbent upon us to enhance the brand and tell the story of the University of Texas across the United States and internationally. And some people say, well, where does that lead? Well, I was in China 2 summers ago, my family and the ASU basketball team. Well, when we're over there, you look up and you see UCLA's got 70 retail stores in China. Mm-hmm. So we're not at the bleeding edge of this. Right. We're behind the curve a little bit. You got Notre Dame going to Ireland playing football games and selling out stadiums all over Ireland. And all of a sudden, you should see the kind of merchandise they sell in Ireland and the presence they got. And so when you look at going to these places and developing relationships, they spin out in many different ways. And so I'll give you an example. So a few years ago, we had a chance when I was at ASU, after Todd Graham's first year, we could have gone to Albuquerque and played in their bowl game, or we could have gone to San Francisco and played in the Kraft Fight Hunger Bowl game. It would have been way easier for the season ticket holders and the average fans in Phoenix and Tempe to drive over to Albuquerque and see the game and drive back, and everybody would have been happy. But we looked at it differently. What we said is, how are we going to take this bowl game and leverage it for the university as a whole? And we decided we wanted to go to San Francisco because outside of Arizona itself and Southern California, the next most important market to the university was the Bay Area. We have more alums there. We have more students that get hired to companies there. ASU sends more kids to Intel than any other school in the country. We had significant donors there. So, and we had Kraft as a potential partner in the deal. So we said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go out to San Francisco. We want to activate our donor base. We want to activate our alumni base. We want to activate the potential employers that are out there that our students could get internships and jobs at. And we said to the bowl game, yeah, we'll come and we'll bring our band. We'll do all the stuff you want us to do. But what you have to do is set us up with Kraft and all their vendors. I want to meet every division of Kraft and every one of our vendors. We took the professors from the school. We took the provost. We took all the deans. We took the president of the school. And we went out there and sat down with Kraft and every one of their departments, every one of their vendors, and said, how can we create a relationship to fund research, to fund internships, to find jobs for our kids, to help professors with their programs. And so we went up there and, we beat the snot out of Navy, and, we're like trying to tell a football coach not to run it up so bad. I'm sitting there with John McCain, and he doesn't know which school to root for, and he's sitting there trying to be polite. And the ratings were atrocious because we're up 30 the first quarter and ran away with it. But what we really walked out of there with, besides the big win, which is sort of what got reported in the papers, and that was the story that those folks cared about, all the yards the running backs got, and that kind of thing, was $40 million worth of research and funding for the university. And so you use athletics as a way to better tell your story and develop the university as a whole, and that's why having a conversation about going to a place like Mexico or going to Shanghai with the basketball team is important, because you're expanding the totality of the business and the opportunities that the university can present to its professors, to its students, to its student athletes, to everybody involved in the university as a whole.
Do you think, is the academic side seeing that? I mean, I think there has always been a tension naturally between athletics and academics. We have talked a lot about that in our previous articles, again, going back under the loss. Is that something that the academic side of the university is seeing? Do you feel like you have needed to or tried to build bridges to connect how what is happening in athletics does have a positive effect on the academic side of the university?
I think generally at UT, the academic side recognizes it. I mean, look, athletics and academics are not necessarily going to have the same point of view all the time, and on certain issues there can be a tension, and like a good one about how much student athletes travel, for instance, how many class days they miss. That's a legitimate discussion to have. But I would say whether I was at ASU or here, in general, they recognize the value, and if you're really smart, you recognize that on average across the country, for every dollar somebody invests in athletics, they tend to invest about $3 on the academic side. So what you can do is use athletics as a means to get people re-engaged in their university who may not have been engaged for some period of time. They come back, you can have a conversation, you have a deeper relationship with them than you otherwise would have had, and that spins out into a whole host of benefits for everybody all the way around. Could be business-wise or personally for the alum. It could be business-wise or in terms of bringing students into the university, or professors into the university, or research dollars into the university. There's a whole host of ways that you can engage that are far deeper and more meaningful and broader than you can at the professional level.
I see. Okay. Very good. We're coming to the end now, and so what I wanted to see is that we have microphones set up in the center aisles here to my left and right. If anybody does have a question for Steve, I hope that you'll stand up and ask the question. I'm sure that you will answer it as honestly as you can. If not, one of the things I was going to just circle back with you, if people are thinking about their questions, and again, please feel free to go to the mics, is what is the sort of the next thing that we're going to see at the University of Texas? Is there, when you kind of have set this in motion, you're coming up on a year, where would you like to see things if your tenure goes 5 years or 10 years or 15 years? And what is the thing that you would most like to have set into motion and perhaps come to fruition as we have seen these, seismic changes in the athletics landscape?
I think we have to continue to be a leader in the revenue so that we can provide the resources where we are. I think we're going to see a new tennis facility. I think we're going to see an expanded football stadium with the South End Zone project. I think we're going to see improvements to golf and softball and baseball and track facilities. I think we're going to see something around a new arena, over time. I'd like to see all of our scholarships fully endowed in the next 10 years. Right. So that each one of our teams is more self-sustaining on an ongoing basis, so that once you leave, you can say, like DeLoss could say when he left, this was in great shape when I left, right, and it's going to be in better shape, hopefully, when I leave.
All right. It looks like we do have at least one question. Yes, please go ahead.
You just mentioned the arena, and I was going to ask about the Irwin Center, and I'm wondering not only where that process stands right now. I think we're talking probably 10 years out before anything really gets going, and how much the game experience matters. I mean, I've been to the University of Pittsburgh, where the Pittsburgh Zoo is. It's a fairly small arena with, I think, about 9,000 people, but it's a fantastic, loud environment for college basketball. How much have you thought about improving the student and attendee experience when it comes to basketball, and what is sort of the vision for the Irwin Center? Thanks.
Good, thank you.
So on the Irwin Center, yeah, we're probably 6 to 8 years out till we have to get to, when the plan currently is that as phase 3 of the medical school facilities come online, they'd like that site. It's valuable both horizontally and vertically, given the view corridor issues that we've got in Austin. For us, I think we have to come to some resolution about what does that facility look like on a go-forth basis. The reality that Austin has had a free arena for the last 3.5 decades at no investment whatsoever. There's not a city in the country this size, and we're soon to be a top 25 market. You look at the growth projections 5 years out. So to be a top 25 market in this country and not to have invested a nickel in an arena is a heck of a position for the city of Austin to be in. And so perhaps we ought to be looking at all the constituent groups and how they contribute or invest in a facility going forward. What do they want out of that building? What kind of services should it provide for whether it's students, student athletes, coaches, administrators, the city, the university, the consumers of events at that facility, wherever it may be or whatever it may be, and how do we look at sharing that investment? We're not as far down the road as I'd like to be. That's a complicated puzzle to put together. There's a lot of public and private elected and appointed officials that will ultimately need to weigh in on that. But it's a bit of a puzzle that we're going to need to solve if we're going to get the med school to be where it needs to be ultimately, which is a great amenity and a great economic driver for this city. As far as game day experience, I'll be quite frank. I'm not satisfied historically with where the game day experience is. So we hired the Disney Institute. We've been in ongoing training since the spring for all of our internal staff and all of our vendors. So as we look at what kind of experience our customers get when they come to our venues, improving that and improving the internal customer experience. And then secondly, we've engaged a number of folks who've got experience in the NBA in the actual game presentation. I think you'll start to see some improvements hopefully with the next football game, and certainly by the time we get to the next basketball season. Some of those.
What are some of those improvements specifically? I'm curious, given the list of folks.
I think you've got to see a more modern game day presentation. I think you've got to start focusing on a driveway to driveway experience. Right. How do you engage from the minute the person leaves their house through into the parking lot, walking up to the venue? What's the food service like? What's the experience like with the ticket takers or ushers? All of the staff that works there, merchandise people. What's the presentation that goes on the board? I mean, the reality is the game presentation hasn't changed a whole lot since I was a student.
Right.
So it needs to be more engaging for all the different constituent groups. So be they students, or be they business people, or be they general public, or be they families. And so some of that is going to require capital investments that are going to take a little longer to happen. You know, our Wi-Fi is not where it should be. Our sound systems are not where it should be. You know, the video systems that we have are good at some venues and not so great at other venues, but those are going to be significant capital investments that we're going to have to make. So we'll make the changes that we can make given the facilities that we've got today, and we'll be trying to generate the revenues to help make those changes that we need to make. And so, you know, sort of goes back to your questions earlier about, you know, where do you want to be in terms of generating revenues? You know, you go replace that Godzillatron, it's some real money. You know, I mean, we met with some folks this morning to talk about getting Wi-Fi where we wanted it to be in the building, and Steve Hank back here does the numbers, goes, well, that's $7.5 million to get the Wi-Fi where we want it to be in the stadium, and another $1 million where it needs to be in the arena, and you know, probably another $500,000 where it needs to be in baseball, and probably $250,000 where it needs to be in softball, and you know, pretty soon you're talking about real money. So we're in the process with those, but hopefully you will see a better product as you go forward this fall.
Yes, sir, please.
You obviously have a great marketing mind. One of the things that I've been here 20 years, and one of the things that was really exciting about this state when I moved here and here in Austin was there was a rivalry, a school-to-school rivalry called A&M in Texas. That's gone away. You know, A&M took their ball and left the field, so to speak. But from a marketing standpoint, great rivalries bring about great marketing. I mean, everybody was stronger when A&M and Texas were fighting each other all the time, and everybody had their school pride, and they measured each other against each other and how they did in different sports, and somebody won in football, but somebody won in baseball. Is there any thought of trying to reinvigorate that relationship? Because it's kind of lonely without the rivalry here, because now it's Texas versus Texas Tech and TCU and everything else. None of those schools measure up. They don't have 50,000 students. You know, and they don't have the long history that existed between these two teams. And if that gets reinvigorated, I can guarantee you, because I am in the retail business of selling licensed merchandise, everybody wins. You know, but without it, I think Texas is worse off without A&M, and I think A&M is worse off without Texas somehow getting back in the battlefield again.
Steve, can you just go ahead and tell us what year will Texas be playing A&M?
You know, I understand that view from certain folks. I mean, you're right. A&M made that decision. From my standpoint, you talk about licensed merchandise, we're still by far and away the leader in the country, and we're not going to give up that position in licensed merchandise sales. We're meeting with those folks today. I look at, and people seem to be more concerned about football than some of the other sports. I mean, we have played Texas A&M in some of the sports. The football games in particular are precious, precious commodities. And I have yet to have somebody present to me a compelling argument for the sake of the brand or the sake of the business why we should go 90 miles down the road and play a football game versus signing a deal to play Michigan like we did a week or so ago. You know, signing a deal to play Ohio State, signing a deal to play some of the more established national and international brands playing Notre Dame. Some of those kind of schools playing USC versus going 90 miles down the road. I mean, I haven't seen a compelling argument to say give up playing Notre Dame or Michigan to go play Texas A&M.
Yes, sir.
Hi, so you talk about engaging with people on a global scale and fans of UT and alumni and things like that. What do you see for the future of engaging with current students on campus here at UT and things like the big ticket and reaching out to students here on campus?
Right. We're going to have somebody on staff that we're just in the midst of restructuring right now that's going to be their focus, to engage students on campus for all of our games. You know, I think, I look back at, we created that position and had somebody at ASU, and what it allowed was, what you should really have with all of your constituent groups, anybody that you market to, which is a conversation or a relationship, not a transaction. Historically, I think we've been too transaction-oriented across all of college athletics. And so, I'll just use the example at ASU. So the student body came to us and said, we'd like to name the student section. I said, okay, well, what do you want to name it? And you know, you play in Tempe, it's in the desert, it's a gazillion degrees, you know, at game time. Even, you know, I got there the first game, I said, well, it can't be that bad. It's 7:30 at night, you know, we're gonna play. And first game was 117 degrees. You know, I don't care if it's dry or not, man. 117 degrees is hot. So they said, well, we'd like to name and you know, we're the Sun Devils. And they said, we'd like to name the student section the Inferno. And I went, oh, that's great. I love it, right? So let's name it the Inferno. And they said, well, can we paint on the treads or on the risers in the student section, you know, we're going to create a logo for the Inferno. And it's like, okay, if we can approve it, and then we're going to paint, you know, the words, the Inferno. In this, so great, we'll buy the paint. You guys, we'll get the stencils. You guys come do it. Okay, great, we'll do that. Last thing we want. Okay, what's that? We want to put a sign up. What's the sign going to be? We want the sign to say, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," right? From Dante's Inferno, right? Yeah. It's like, oh God, it's perfect, you know. And you know, so my dumbass move was, I said, well, why don't you do it in Latin? And one student said to me, no, you silly. It's the first book written in Italian in Italy. It's got to be in Italian, right? So, you know, there we go. So, you know, you can start to have some fun, have a conversation, make it interesting for people to be involved. And that's what we did. And, you know, we wound up with having DJs at the basketball games and people coming out from behind curtains to be the craziest fan. And you just you got to make it fun. You got to have some interaction, some involvement. So I think you'll see more of that as we go forward, as we get into the fall, get the staff in place to do that. And, you know, I'd like to see a better tailgating experience around the football stadium, because we're going to lose a lot of parking spots, and we've already lost some park space. So, you know, how do we make that more interesting as a door-to-door experience, whether you're coming from, you know, West Campus and walking over, or whether you're driving from Pflugerville?
Last question. Yes, ma'am, please.
Hi. As we saw, like with the World Cup, you know, soccer is only becoming more and more popular. So are there any plans to get a UT men's soccer team?
Good question.
Yeah, I don't look at us adding another team until we can endow it. You know, the reality is that we're working as hard as we can to provide all the student services we can for all the teams that we got right now, and we want to make sure they're all as competitive as can be. We've got probably, give or take a little bit, $750 million worth of construction projects coming in the next 6, 8, 10 years, assuming we do a new arena. Without the arena, it's still going to be $200, $300 million. You know, so to sort of put that in perspective, we'll spend more money on a new arena than DeLoss Dodds spent in his entire career at the University of Texas on facilities.
That's amazing.
And so I don't think it's prudent for us to step out there and take on more expense, particularly in an environment where we don't know where all the lawsuits are going to fall out and what the economics are going to look like. Because I don't want to be the AD who winds up reducing the number of sports at this school. But I'll tell you, sitting in the room with lots of other ADs over the last week or so, everybody's running as hard as they can to generate as much revenue as they can, to put the best product out there on the field and provide the best student services they can for their student athletes. And if it turns out that we got to start writing big fat checks to football players and basketball players, and then ultimately, my view is with Title IX, you're going to wind up writing them to everybody. You will destroy college athletics as we know it today. And that's bad, because next to the GI Bill, the next largest source of college scholarships in this country are student athletic scholarships to all the universities in this country. And so you start looking at the hard numbers of what would have to happen, you could probably see half those scholarships in this country get wiped out. And that's not good for students, It's not good for student athletes. It's not good for universities. It's not good for the Olympic movement, which is basically where all the development for the Olympics goes on, is on our campuses. So, you know, if you want to destroy a system that's good for 99.5% of the student athletes to enrich 1/2% of the student athletes out there, go ahead and do it, but you're going to destroy what college athletics means to this country right now.
One more, please. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Steve, just wanted to get your thoughts, a couple. What's the athletic director's role, your role with the top donors at the school? How much of it is your responsibility to court those relationships, or can you have that be the foundation? And as far as Charlie Strong, in terms of the PR for Charlie, how much of that is your role or responsibility, or the communications department's role at Texas?
Well, certainly our folks at the Longhorn Foundation have some responsibility there. I mean, that's their day-to-day job. We are changing our focus of what we do at the Longhorn Foundation. We've moved what was largely the transactional, ticket-based relationships in working with Aspire into having a 24-person sales and service team to take care of those needs. And so then that allows the Longhorn Foundation to focus more on philanthropic giving, capital campaigns, endowments, the annual fund, to drive that part of the revenues that we need to build facilities, endow scholarships, endow coaching positions. At the end of the day, those folks roll up to me, and I've got responsibility for them. And so I spend a good bit of time with a number of our donors. I spend a good bit of time right now restructuring that staff and adding to that staff. We're going to be adding people to work there because, quite frankly, there just are a lot of folks that are involved who would like to be more involved, or who either don't get communicated to regularly or have never been communicated to, and we want to develop relationships with. And so that part of our staff will grow and hopefully bear considerable fruits for us, because I think we've got tremendous upside there, and we've got tremendous passion about this university and people that want to be supportive. So that's sort of the fundraising side. The PR side, we've got a PR staff. Day to day, it's their job to oversee that. You know, Charlie and I talk pretty regularly, depending upon travel schedules and what's going on. My job really is to put him in a position to have as much success as he can possibly have, and ultimately, you know, his success on the field or in the marketplace with the press or others is a function of his work, our staff's work, and my work ultimately. I think he's done a great job. You look at the response we had in the 13-city tour around the state in 31 days or whatever. You know, it was like a rock star, the places I went with him. Is, you know, we had our event down in the valley, we had to move it 3 times and ultimately took it to the convention center there, and you know, families from all over the valley just came out as if we had Mick Jagger there. So probably, well, Mick's getting a little old, probably somebody younger.
Very good. On behalf of Texas Monthly, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight for this conversation. I'd like to thank our sponsors, MyPlates.com, Cordova on Canyon Lake, and for the facility of the AT&T Executive Education and Conference Center. And of course, more than anything, I'd like to thank you. Thanks, Steve, for coming out. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.